I thought I owned peace in an abandoned mountain house until Karen called me a trespasser at my own front gate. She paraded a forged HOA notice, laughing while neighbors whispered over diner coffee. Then my aunt, a judge, forced a hearing, and a formal order echoed under the community flagpole. Believe me, that was only the first crack in their story. Let me take you back. I bought an abandoned mountain house, but the key didn't turn. The ridges caught for half a breath, then refused. Brass against brass, a tiny scrape like the house itself had learned to frown at me. On the porch, a woman cradled a mug and smiled like she had been waiting for me to fail. Evening, she called. "You must be lost." Her voice was smooth polite in the way of someone already in charge. Steam curled from her cup, drifting into the cool dusk. Behind her, the cabin door stood open just far enough to show the glow of a lamp and the shadow of someone moving inside. My house, I thought. My sunrise, my ridge. And yet I was the guest. "This is my place," I said. My hand tightened on a manila sleeve. From it, I drew the folded deed. The raised seal caught the porch light. "County auction. Recorded last week." She tilted her head. "Bless your heart. You're mistaken." The wind came down from the slope, scented with pine resin and faint wood smoke. I pressed the paper against the post, steadying it, as if the embossed eagle could steady me. My thumb ran across the seal, feeling its stubborn bump. "We've kept this cabin up for a year," she added, eyes flicking over my flannel shirt, I tired truck in the drive. "It doesn't change because you show up with paper." "I'll unlock my door now," I said, lifting the key. My words were slow, measured the way I used to read tracking numbers at the post office, each digit an oath. She sipped, then set her cup on the rail. "No need. Rick's already on the way. Rick, Deputy Morrison. Knows us well." Headlights split the pines, washed the gravel white. Tires whispered, then the cruiser rolled in as if it had visited many times before. Deputy Morrison climbed out with a wave meant for a picnic, not a property dispute. "Evening, folks," he said. "What's the problem tonight?" I held up the deed. "This mountain house was sold at auction. My name is recorded. I'm here to take possession." He barged up with papers, she said, quick as a cue. Started prowling, taking pictures. "I photographed the boundary pin," I said. "It's been shifted east." The deputy took the paper, glanced too fast to read, and returned it. "Even if that's true, sir, tenants have rights. Civil matter. They're not tenants. They're trespassing." He exhaled, looked at her. "One more step, and you're trespassing." The words landed like a shovel to the ribs. My key sagged in my palm, heavier than it looked. Behind me, the truck waited with the smell of diner coffee seeping from its cup holder. On the seat, church flyers from the post office fluttered: choir practice, potluck, rummage sale. Ordinary ink, the kind of anchors that had steadied me my whole life. "Sir," he said again, softer, "not tonight." I stepped back to the iron gate. Its hinge groaned like an old knee. Beside the post, a brass cap gleamed, boundary pin cleaned recently. I crouched, snapped photos. Click, click. Cold air fogged my screen. The cabin chimney breathed a lazy ribbon of smoke that drifted down, curling around me like a leash. She moved closer, mug steaming again. "You seem stressed." "If you'd like to leave your number A, deed feels weightless when a smile denies it," I said. "Pardon, nothing." The deputy's radio barked. He nodded toward the road. "Document from here, then go." I framed one shot with pin, gate, and porch. 3 clicks. Evidence enough for now. Her grin still burned brighter than the flash. "Name?" I asked him. "Morrison." "And yours?" I asked her. She laughed. "Ask the HOA. They'll tell you." The porch stayed dark. I eased the gate shut. The latch met with a small kiss. Gravel pressed into my jeans as I sat on the timber rail. I laid the key across my palm, its teeth catching the last glow. A child's scooter lay in the grass, abandoned, but claimed like the cabin itself. She leaned against the post, eyes steady. Then she flicked the switch. Porch light on square of yellow across the boards. Porch light off dark again. It felt like a signal, "Not yours." The deputy tapped my truck window with 2 knuckles. "We'll get it sorted tomorrow. Let the paper speak." "It will," I said. I set the deed beside me, touched the seal one more time. The mountain whispered with crickets and cooling metal. When I climbed into the cab, the church flyers slid, waiting for my bulletin board. Headlights caught the boundary pin one last time, a wink of brass promising it would be in the same place come morning. Behind me, the cabin melted into dark. Only her smile stayed sharp as the click of a lock that refused my name. The subject line glowed across my inbox. "Notice your deed is under review." For a long minute I stared at the screen, hoping the words might shift into something friendlier. But they didn't. They pulsed steady, sharp as neon. I clicked, and the body of the email filled the page. "The HOA board has identified a potential discrepancy regarding your recorded deed. Until clarification, you are not to access the cabin. The cabin. My cabin. Bought in daylight, sealed with county ink." Yet, here was the HOA speaking like a court. I printed the message. The old machine groaned, pulled paper crooked, then jammed. A red light blinked while the ceiling fan hummed its tired cycle above me. The office filled with the smell of overheated toner. For a moment I pressed my palms flat on the desk, listening to that fan and that beeping printer, the sound of being stalled by machines, processed by people who knew how to turn patience into power. At the post office bulletin board, the day felt brighter, but not kinder. Flyers for choir rehearsal, for a spaghetti dinner for a lost dog, all pinned neat with thumbtacks. Behind them, taped to the corner where few would notice, was a notice with the HOA letterhead. It carried my parcel number. I pulled it closer. "Boundary under review. Occupancy frozen until further plat verification." My hand trembled. I slid a flyer back into place. "Casserole fundraiser Sunday at the church hall," then read the notice again. The print was faint, as if it wanted to hide. "Hal," a voice said behind me. It was old Mr. Connolly from the diner balancing a box of mail. "Trouble. Just paperwork," I said, folding the notice carefully. "Paperwork's never just paperwork," he muttered and shuffled out. At Murphy's Diner that afternoon, I unfolded the county plat map across a sticky table. The waitress filled my mug, and her perfume mixed with bacon grease. I traced the boundary line with a blunt pencil. It curved, then shifted a hair east just enough to explain the HOA's claim. Someone had filed an old plat, cropped tight, hiding the newer survey. The line blurred where my cabin sat. Two neighbors leaned in from the next booth. "Looks like trouble," one said. "Plat, map," I answered. "Best not to fight the board," the other whispered. "They've got bylaws and patience." I kept tracing the line slow. "Patience doesn't move a pin 2 feet east," I said. They shrugged, went back to their pie. The printer at the diner spat out my receipt. I tucked the plat map back into its tube. Outside, the wind caught the paper edges, snapping them against my leg. The map felt older than it was, like a relic already weighed down with arguments. Back home, I spread the map on my table beside the jammed printout of the email. Together, they told a story. Your deed is under review. Your cabin under lock. Your claim under suspicion. The fan clicked overhead. I leaned back, let its hum fill the room. On the floor, the manila sleeve with the deed rested under my boot heel, a reassurance and a warning. I opened the email again, scrolled to the bottom. A single line bolded, "Do not access the cabin." I whispered it aloud the way one repeats a threat to feel its edges. My voice sounded strange in the quiet room. Paper can be silent, but when it speaks, when a seal presses, when a notice posts, when a board sends its email, it testifies louder than any shout. Paper is quiet until it testifies. I said to no one. I folded the map, folded the email, tucked them back into the sleeve with the deed. 3 sheets, 3 voices. The weight pressed against my ribs like another kind of lock. The cabin light might be on tonight, or it might not. But the board had already claimed authority, had already written me out with 1 email, 1 bulletin, 1 map. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow, I would find someone who could read the seal louder than they could. The diner smelled of bacon and black coffee when she walked in. My aunt, Judge Ellen McKinney, carried herself like the gavel followed her everywhere, though she wore a simple raincoat and carried an umbrella that dripped steady on the floor. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she held my deed up toward the neon open sign in the window. The embossed seal caught the light. "This seal's real," she said. Her voice was flat, but I heard steel beneath it. "Whatever else the HOA says, they can't erase this." Relief loosened my shoulders for the first time all week, but the relief was thin. The cabin was still locked, the board was still loud, and every bulletin notice painted me as an intruder. She slid into the booth across from me, pushing aside the laminated menu. "Show me everything." I spread the pile across the table. The email notice, the bulletin copy, the plat map rolled open, edges curling like stubborn bark. Ellen smoothed them with careful hands, her wedding ring clicking against the diner glass. "You're not imagining things," she said, tracing the survey line with her fingertip. "This curve here, it doesn't match the recorded lien transcript. Someone submitted a cropped plat to create doubt. Classic maneuver." The waitress appeared, pot in hand. "Refill, please," Ellen said. Coffee poured dark and steady steam curling between us. Rain ticked against the diner window, soft but insistent. I shifted, listening to the teaspoon clink as she stirred her cup. Silent beats filled the space. The rain, the clink, the hum of neon. All the small sounds that framed big trouble. "They're counting on you folding," Ellen said. "But we move with paper and sunlight." I almost smiled at the phrase. It sounded like something from one of her campaign speeches years back before she'd sworn off politics for the bench. "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning, you shine light on every record they'd rather keep quiet. I'll file a records request for the lien transcript. Meanwhile, you hunt down evidence, tax receipts, survey logs, witness statements. We've got 48 hours before the board meets again." The waitress set down 2 plates of pie under glass domes. On the house, she whispered, "Heard you've been having a rough time." "Thank you," I said, though my voice sounded far away. Baseball chatter drifted from the counter radio, local boys talking playoffs voices, bright in contrast to the gloom outside. It reminded me this was still a town, not just a boardroom battlefield. Ellen tapped her pen against the plat. "Notice how the annotation here stops short. That's where the real survey extended your boundary. If we cross-check it with county archives, it'll expose their maneuver." "Feels like they've stacked the deck," I said. She shook her head. "Courts listen to documents, not whispers. That's our advantage." I watched raindrops race down the glass. I thought about the cabin porch light, the door that didn't open, the deputy who'd looked at me like a trespasser. Now, across the table, I saw the other side, a judge. My own blood reminding me that paper, when handled right, outweighs gossip. "You really think 48 hours is enough?" I asked. "It has to be," she said. "Give me your word you'll hold back until then. No showing up at the cabin, no confrontations. Let the records do the talking first." I breathed out slowly. My fork tapped the edge of untouched pie. "All right," I said finally. 48 hours. I'll hunt evidence. You handle the transcripts." She raised her mug in a quiet toast. "Then it's decided." Outside, headlights smeared across the wet asphalt. Inside, the ceiling fan pushed warm air while the rain kept time on the windows. I thought of the cabin sitting in that rain light, off or on unreachable for now. The map lay between us, annotated and fragile, but for the first time it looked less like a weapon against me and more like a path forward. Still, the weight of her condition pressed on me. 48 hours felt both generous and impossible. Could I hold back while strangers occupied my place? Could I trust paper to speak loud enough? I folded the plat carefully, tucked it into the sleeve with the deed. The edges crackled the sound of a vow. "Yes," I said. 48 hours. The email subject line froze me mid-sip of morning coffee, temporary trespass restraining order. Attached was a PDF stamped with the HOA letterhead, neat serif fonts pretending to carry the weight of the law. I scrolled down with shaking hands. Their claim that I had interfered with property boundaries at 3:15 a.m. the previous week. The evidence was a single screenshot, a blurry camera frame lit by the ghostly wash of a security lamp. It showed the boundary pin my pin tilted a few degrees. The timestamp glowed 03:15. By noon, the order sat in my inbox like a padlock on my name. The hearing convened in the community clubhouse, its fluorescent lights buzzing like annoyed wasps. Folding tables sagged under trays of store-bought cookies and paper cups of weak lemonade. On the bulletin board by the door, the printed notice flapped under a pushpin, a silent proclamation of my supposed trespass. Judge Ellen sat beside me, eyes sharp behind reading glasses. She tapped the printout of the PDF. They're stretching this. No affidavit, no chain of custody, just a timestamp. That's not evidence, it's theater. I nodded, though my throat was dry. Around us, the board members shuffled papers with the smugness of people who thought they had the upper hand. One of them clicked a remote, and the projector whined to life. On the screen, the same screenshot magnified until the pixels bled into one another. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chair announced at 3:15 a.m., "on Saturday, this homeowner was observed tampering with association property." The fluorescent hum seemed to get louder. I clenched my hands under the table, the deed folder pressing into my lap. The smell of burnt coffee from a styrofoam urn mingled with the wax of floor polish. Ellen leaned close, voice low. Wait for them to overplay it. The board cycled through the slides, first the screenshot, then the same image circled in red, then a bold caption, "Trespass caught." Each click of the remote was like a gavel, their case building more on repetition than truth. Finally, Ellen stood smoothing her blazer. "Your Honor," she addressed the moderator as if the title carried real jurisdiction. "This so-called evidence proves nothing. A timestamp without context is meaningless. Where's the full footage? Where's verification that this homeowner was even present?" Her words landed like small hammers, steady and calm. The chair stiffened. "The HOA has no obligation to provide continuous video." "That's convenient," Ellen replied, letting silence linger. The projector fan whirred, filling the room with an anxious hum. A beat of stillness passed every eye on the screen. Then a board member snapped, voice cracking, "That proves nothing." The outburst hung in the stale air. Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Exactly." The sign was the first thing that hit me. "Open House," staked crookedly in the gravel arrow aimed square at my cabin. A couple of sedans lined the drive doors open, radios murmuring. Strangers carried paper cups of lemonade as if they belonged. Children blew soap bubbles that floated lazily across the porch rail, the same porch where I had once stood with a deed no one believed. I stopped halfway down the drive, wind carrying the unmistakable smell of BBQ smoke from a neighbor's grill. The scent twisted my stomach. This wasn't a simple gathering. It was theater. My cabin had become the stage. I walked forward, the gravel crunching under my boots louder than the chatter. My folder pressed tight against my side, the county deed inside. People turned their conversations, faltering. A man in sunglasses whispered something to his partner. The bubbles popped softly against the grass, little explosions in the silence. "Excuse me," I said, voice steady, though my palms sweated. "This is not for sale." Karen emerged from the porch like an actress hitting her mark. Designer, yoga, top, realtor-style badge clipped high. Her smile was polished, rehearsed. "Oh, don't mind him," she cooed, turning to the strangers. "Just confusion, folks. Please continue the tour." Murmurs stirred, uncertain. I pulled the deed free, held it aloft. The raised seal caught the afternoon sun. "This is mine. County auction taxes cleared, title insured. It's not confusion, it's the law." Silence spread wider this time. I could hear the squeak of folding chairs being set down, the faint slap of flip-flops on porch steps as neighbors leaned closer. Karen's smile thinned. "Paper doesn't change reality. We've lived here, invested in this home, and the community knows it." She gestured broadly at the strangers as if their lemonade cups were evidence. From the back, someone muttered, "He's got the documents, though." I planted my boots deeper in the gravel. "Here's an MLS flyer I picked up this morning." I slapped it on the porch rail. "Who signed this listing contract? Who gave you the right to sell?" Her eyes flickered a blink too quick. That blink was enough. The crowd sensed it. A neighbor clapped once sharp. Another joined, then another. Applause rippled through the yard like a breeze through leaves. The smell of BBQ smoke thickened, wrapping the moment in strange solidarity. Karen spun toward them, her composure fraying. "Stop applauding him. He's nothing but a predator. He wants to throw us into the street." But the applause only grew louder. A woman shook her head and said, "Let the man have his house back." I felt awe and anger blend. For weeks I'd been cast as villain, my name dragged through bulletin boards and HOA emails. And now, in the sunlight with neighbors watching, dignity was clapping back into my hands. I spoke without planning, voice carrying across the porch. Truth doesn't whisper. It rings the bell. The words seemed to land with weight. Someone in the crowd repeated them. Another scribbled on a notepad. Karen's voice cracked. "Look at the children. Do you want to see them homeless?" Ellen stepped up beside me, calm as ever. She held her phone screen glowing with an email. "No one wants anyone homeless, but this listing is already being pulled. Fraudulent contracts don't survive daylight." The gasp was collective. The crowd turned from Karen to me, then back again. The applause surged a second time, this time less hesitant. Karen's mouth opened, but the sound failed. For a moment, the yard held still, bubbles drifting, BBQ smoke curling, paper flyers wilting in the heat. The for sale sign looked absurd, now a wooden lie nailed into gravel. The potluck mood unraveled. Families gathered, kids folded chairs, drained cups of lemonade. They left shaking their heads, some muttering about never seen anything like it. I stayed rooted in the gravel deed in one hand, the MLS flyer in the other. The keys in my pocket felt heavier, still partial, not yet mine to use, but heavier with promise. Karen lingered on the porch, jaw set, eyes flashing. But the listing was gone, the applause undeniable. The silent beat of BBQ smoke drifted through the yard as the last bubble popped in the grass. For the first time since this began, the crowd stood with me. The cliffhanger was not whether I'd keep fighting. It was what more the board would try now that their open house farce had collapsed in public. The micro-climax came fast. Whispers rippled through the back row where neighbors had gathered out of curiosity. Someone muttered about selective editing. Another asked why footage stopped at one frame. I felt the current shift, subtle but real. My humiliation from Chapter 1, being treated like a trespasser, was giving way to a thin thread of validation. Ellen pressed. "We request the complete recording, not a single image. If the HOA has nothing to hide, release the full file." The chair fumbled with papers. "That's not standard procedure." "Then let's make it one," she said. Silent beats framed the standoff. The fluorescent buzz overhead, the projector's fan humming the faint crackle of cookie wrappers as someone shifted in their chair. Small, ordinary sounds became the drumbeat of a larger reveal. I sat straighter, pulse steady. This was the first time the board had been pushed back. "Truth flickers even at 3:15, Ellen added. The line caught in the room like static. A neighbor scribbled it down. The session ended without a verdict, but the motion was clear. The board had to release more footage. They could no longer hide behind a single still. Outside, the afternoon sun washed the community notice board. Flyers for church choir rehearsals curled next to the HOA order, both pinned under the same thumbtack. Life in the neighborhood continued, cookies, choir, and accusations. Yet for the first time, I felt the balance tilting. As we walked to the parking lot, Ellen tucked the printout into her folder. "This is the reveal," she said quietly. "Now we make them show the rest." I looked back at the clubhouse. Through the glass door, the projector still glowed, faintly forgotten, but not silent. I thought of that frame at 3:15, and how fragile truth looked when frozen. Now, though the next reel had to play. The cliffhanger was simple. Undeniable, the HOA would be forced to release more footage, and in that footage lay either my downfall or their undoing. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, taped right across the cabin's weathered door. Bold letters at the top read, "Injunction granted." For a moment I simply stared at it, the sunlight catching the embossed county stamp. Weeks of rumor and staged theater had built to this one sheet of legal paper, taped where no smile or smirk could erase it. I reached forward, hand trembling. My reflection bent in the glass pane of the door. That's when I heard the metallic jangle of a locksmith's tools behind me. Neighbors were already gathering on the HOA lawn. Folding chairs had been dragged out, forming a loose semicircle in the trimmed grass. The smell of cut lawns hung thick in the summer heat, mingled with faint perfume from someone's casserole cooling on a picnic table nearby. This wasn't just enforcement, it was community ritual. Judge Ellen stood a step away. Voice measured as she addressed the crowd. The court has reviewed the deed, the survey, and the video records. The injunction is granted. This property remains under the legal ownership of Mr. McKinney. She didn't need to raise her voice. The words traveled through the folding chairs past the bulletin board where flyers still curled from last week's choir practice. I held the deed in my hands, the seal catching afternoon sun. My aunt's words made it echo louder than any gavel. The locksmith approached his toolbox, clicking shut. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. The silent beat came then. The metallic click of tumblers falling slow and deliberate as he turned the new lock into place. Each sound was louder than conversation, louder than gossip, louder than every accusation that had called me trespasser. Behind me, someone whispered, "That's the sound of truth." The door opened hinges, groaning. Sunlight spilled into the empty entryway, the air inside cooler and untouched. For the first time, the cabin recognized my key. Karen stood on the edge of the lawn, sunglasses hiding her eyes but not her fury. "This is harassment," she snapped. "We'll appeal." Ellen kept her gaze steady. "You have every right to pursue appeal, but today the order is binding." Karen's shoulders tightened, her voice rising. "You think a piece of paper changes the fact we've lived here?" I stepped onto the porch, the locksmith receipt still warm in my palm. "No," I said. "It's not just paper, it's the law, and today it speaks louder than rumor." The neighbors shifted, murmurs spreading like a ripple. Some nodded, some looked away, but no one clapped for her this time. The micro-climax came when the board chair finally stood. His voice was uneven, not polished like at the last hearing. "On behalf of the board, we acknowledge an error in judgment. We acted prematurely, and we apologize for the distress caused." The crowd absorbed it in silence. No applause, no cheer, just the weight of an institution finally bowing its head. Karen's face went crimson. "You can't apologize for my house," she shouted, pointing at the cabin. "We belong there." But the contradiction hung in the air. Behind me, the new key rested firmly in the lock. I raised it slowly, letting the sun glint off the brass. "A key turns louder than a shout," I said. The phrase slipped out half prayer, half declaration. And the crowd reacted, not with claps this time, but with something quieter, steadier. Neighbors leaned forward, listening. The smell of cut grass rose again as the wind shifted, carrying away the sharp edges of her voice. Ellen placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is the justice beat," she murmured. Karen ripped off her sunglasses, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this. All of you." She stormed away across the lawn, heels sinking into the damp soil. The sight of her retreat, framed by folding chairs and casseroles cooling under foil, was less a threat than an ending. The injunction still fluttered on the cabin door county seal, pressing down against every falsehood. The board's apology still rang in my ears, and the key in my hand felt heavy but right. Neighbors began to stand, some drifting toward me. A man from the post office offered his hand. "Took guts," he said. A woman from the diner passed me a paper plate stacked with cookies. "Welcome home." The lawn was filled not with applause this time, but with the softer echo of a community acknowledging what was overdue. I stood in the doorway looking back at them all. The cabin, silent for months, was opening its throat again. Justice didn't roar, it unfolded one lock at a time. And as the order was raised high for all to see, Karen's figure shrinking down the street, I knew the fight wasn't fully over. But this chapter was closed with a click. The notice went up overnight, pinned squarely to the bulletin board at the post office. The top line, printed in bold black, "Special Audit Meeting Tonight, HOA, Community Center." I stood there with my coffee cooling in my hand, reading it twice. The bulletin board was crowded with choir flyers, bake sale announcements, and a note about a missing beagle. But this sheet was crisp, freshly tacked, and unavoidable. It was the community's summons. After months of arguments and whispered doubts, the books would finally be opened. By evening, the community center smelled of strong coffee from a dented urn. Along the back wall, neighbors had lined up casserole trays covered with foil condensation beading at the corners. The folding chairs filled quickly. The ceiling fans hummed overhead, pushing warm air that carried the faint rustle of paper as people shuffled copies of the meeting agenda. At the front, a thick binder sat square on the table, the audit ledger. Judge Ellen stood beside it, a cardigan replacing her courtroom robes, but the weight in her voice was unmistakable. "Tonight, we read the record," she said. "Numbers don't spin stories. They testify." Her hand pressed the cover as though consecrating it. The board members sat, stiff shoulders tight. The secretary flipped pages too quickly, trying to control the rhythm. The silent beat of the moment was the sound of paper rasping under the steady hum of the fan, ordinary sounds that felt heavy tonight. Ellen opened the ledger to the first flagged page. Here, expenditures marked as maintenance. Yet the vendor listed does not exist. She turned the book outward, and here, duplicate charges filed weeks apart, identical down to the cent. These are not clerical slips. These are deliberate. A murmur rippled through the chairs. Frank from the hardware store leaned forward, frowning. Lisa from the diner whispered to her neighbor, "That's not just sloppy." One board member cleared his throat. "We acted within standard discretion." Ellen's reply was calm-cutting. Standard discretion does not end in personal checks. This ledger shows funds redirected into individual accounts. She lifted a photocopy, high signatures visible. "This is not discretion. This is misuse." Gasps carried across the room. Someone muttered, "I paid that assessment last winter." Another, and it went straight into their pockets. I watched the shift, subtle but sure. For weeks the board had wielded paper against me. Now the paper in Ellen's hands was turning back against them. The treasurer finally broke shoulders sagging. Mistakes were made. "No," Ellen said, flipping one last page. Choices were made. The micro-climax came as the secretary rose carrying a stack of envelopes. Names were called one by one. Mr. Rodriguez, Mrs. Davis, the Patel family. Each envelope held a refund check, each name spoken aloud, an act of apology. Hands reached out hesitant at first, then firm. Envelopes opened eyes, scanned amounts, gasps escaped lips. Neighbors began clapping. Not tentative, not scattered, but strong, echoing across the tiled hall. Chairs shifted, casserole lids rattled as people stood holding checks aloft. I felt the current in my chest deeper than when I'd held my deed. This wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was dignity redistributed account by account. I found my voice almost without thinking. Justice echoes louder when spoken together. The line carried through the hum of the fans. A woman near the back repeated it aloud. Someone walked to the bulletin board and scribbled it across the margin of the notice with a ballpoint pen. Karen sat in the aisle row, arms folded, sunglasses perched like armor. Her lips curled. "This is mob rule," she hissed. But when her own name was never called, the silence around her was deafening. No one looked her way. Ellen closed the ledger with a firm thud that silenced the applause. "This audit is step 1. Misuse has been shown. Restitution is underway. Step 2 will follow." The board chair voice, unsteady, added, "On behalf of the board, we apologize. By name to every family here." He glanced down as if hoping the floor might swallow him. The crowd didn't boo. They didn't cheer. They absorbed the words, their checks folded in shirt pockets and purses, proof of justice counted in dollars and dignity. Then Ellen spoke the final line, the one that hung in the air like the closing hymn. "Tomorrow we will move toward transfer. The order will pass, and with it, closure." Neighbors drifted toward the casseroles, lifting lids and spooning portions. The scent of green beans and macaroni filled the air, clashing with the bitter tang of coffee poured into styrofoam cups. Conversations shifted from accusation to relief, from suspicion to humor. Someone even joked about repainting the gate. I stood near the bulletin board, eyes on the fresh notice. The paper rustled gently under the pushpin as the fan hummed above, carrying away the night's heat. The keys in my pocket felt heavier, more certain. My deed echoed now not in isolation but in the voices of dozens each with their own check folded into a pocket. The cliffhanger was written plainly in Ellen's promise the ledger had spoken tonight, but tomorrow the order itself would change hands. Dawn came quiet, the kind of light that seeps rather than spills. I stood on the cabin's porch, air still cool, dew clinging to the railing. The horizon blushed pink over the ridge. For the first time in months, I didn't brace for an email, a notice, or a knock. Instead, Judge Ellen stepped toward me, folder tucked beneath her arm, the sun painting a soft halo at her shoulders. She opened the folder and handed me two things, the transfer order crisp with the county seal and the brass keys I had fought to turn. "It's done," she said, voice calm, almost reverent. Neighbors gathered across the lawn, casserole dishes, steaming folding tables sagging with potluck trays. Children played near the post where once an open house sign had mocked me. Now it was bare, waiting for a plaque. The choir from the Methodist church hummed softly as they rehearsed under the trees, voices blending into harmony that carried across the grass. It wasn't triumphant, not loud, but steady like the dawn itself. Ellen gestured toward the porch swing. Ready, I nodded. Together, we turned as two volunteers unveiled a bronze plaque mounted against the cabin wall. The tarp slipped away, clattering down, and the engraved words caught the rising light. Whitman Community House, restored 2024. The silent beat was complete stillness, broken only by the faint creak of the porch swing in the breeze, and the choir's harmony drifting through the air. I touched the plaque metal cool under my palm. It felt heavier than the pin, heavier than the deed. This was permanence. Karen wasn't here. Her storming exit had ended her hold. Instead, neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, some with refund checks still folded in shirt pockets, others clutching styrofoam cups of coffee. Ellen cleared her throat. This house no longer represents division. It represents the people who stood for truth when it was hardest. The applause was soft, but unanimous hands meeting in rhythm rather than volume. Someone called for a photo. We gathered under the plaque, shifting to fit. I stood in the middle deed folder, finally closed at my side. Ellen's hand on my shoulder. The camera clicked. For once, proof wasn't forged in screenshots or notices, it was framed in a group portrait. The micro-climax came in that instant, no more hearings, no more staged sales. Just neighbors, smiling casseroles, cooling sunrise, spilling gold across the cabin wall. "Justice isn't loud," I said, as people began drifting back to their tables. "It's steady as sunrise." The line landed gently. Not shouted, but carried in nods and murmurs. A woman from the choir echoed it aloud. Someone jotted it on the bulletin board, pinning it next to bake sale flyers. The cabin, once abandoned, now belonged to everyone. The swing creaked as two kids climbed onto it, pushing off with heels, laughter weaving with the choir's hymn. Ellen raised the order once more, holding it so the county seal caught the light. "As of today, this property is transferred to the Whitman Community House Trust." Her words felt ceremonial more than legal. Neighbors clapped again this time with relief, some embracing, some wiping eyes. I slipped the keys into the lock, turned them once. The metallic click was no longer a fight, it was confirmation. The door swung wide and the cabin seemed to breathe in the morning air. Plates of food made their way around. The smell of baked beans and apple casserole filled the porch. A neighbor handed me a plate, saying simply, "Welcome home, our home." That "our" struck me. The journey had started with humiliation, being treated like a trespasser on my own deed. Now it ended with a legacy, the cabin not mine alone, but a symbol of justice turned outward for the community. The cliffhanger was no longer about battle, but about what would grow here. The choir lifted a hymn as the sun broke fully over the ridge. The plaque shone brighter than any gavel. The order folded in my pocket pressed gently, not as burden, but as closure. I leaned on the porch rail, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise crown the cabin. For the first time, the story didn't need defending. It simply stood, bronze and steady, echoing beyond me. Legacy had arrived, not loud, not fleeting, but steady as sunrise. The morning light stretched across the porch swing as I held the restored keys, the bronze plaque still cool beneath my palm. The county seal on the order had been read aloud the night before a quiet ceremony that carried further than any argument. In that moment, the cabin was no longer mine alone, but our community's proof that boundaries can be redrawn and wrongs repaired without shouting. Healing came not from victory, but from neighbors gathering, sharing casseroles, and lifting each other. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. Share your HOA story below your map might help someone redraw theirs.